The rain had come in the night, and it had not gone. It stood in the ruts of the lane. It dripped from the eaves of Sallow Mill. It made the yard stones dark and slick, and it turned the low field beyond the race into a sheet of standing water the color of weak tea. Thomasin Varell was inside the mill house before the light was properly up. She had a rag in one hand and a tin of oil on the sill beside her. She was going along the shafts one at a time, the way her father had taught her, the way she had done every Tuesday morning since she was 11 years old. The wheel was still. It had been still for 9 days. She worked the rag into the collar of the second shaft and turned it slowly and felt for the catch that meant the bearing wanted packing. There was no catch. The shaft turned smooth and quiet under her hand. Her father had kept it so. She would keep it so, for as long as it was hers to keep, which she thought would not be long. She was 20 years old. She had buried her father 8 days before in the churchyard at Nettlecombe in rain. Very like this rain. She had no brother of her own blood. Her mother had died when she was 6, and she remembered almost nothing of her except a smell of lavender and a low voice singing in a language that was not English. She had no money at all. She had the mill, or she was about to have it, and the mill stood on a lease that belonged to a man she had never seen. She oiled the 3rd shaft. She oiled the 4th. She wiped the tin's rim and pressed the lid down with her thumb until it seated. Outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. In a working week, the whole building spoke. The floor spoke. The stone spoke. She had heard none of it in 9 days, and the quiet had begun to feel less like rest and more like something holding its breath. She set the tin on the sill. Then the door scraped and a boy put his head in. He was Anstey's youngest, and his hair was plastered flat, and he had run the whole way from the village and had to breathe twice before he could get the words out. "Miss Varell, they are waiting on you. Mr. Cadby says 11, and it is gone 11. Thomasin took her hand off the shaft. "Then they are waiting," she said. The reading was held in the long room above the rowan and fleece. Thomasin came in wet to the knee and did not apologize for it. There were perhaps 30 people in it, and no more than 9 had any cause to be there. The rest had come because a mill is a thing a village cares about, and because a man had died without a son. Mr. Cadby sat at the top of the room behind a table borrowed from the tap room. He was a small, dry man who had done her father's business for 20 years and had never once been seen to hurry. He had a leather case in front of him and a look of settled discomfort about the mouth. Gideon Halloway stood by the window. He did not sit. He had his hat in both hands, and he was turning it slowly, a quarter turn and a quarter turn, and he stopped when he saw her come in. He had come to Sallow Mill at 19 when his mother married Thomasin's father, and he had stayed after his mother died because there was nowhere for him to go. 9 years he had worked it. He had cut the new launder himself and set it. He had gone to Bristol on his own money for the second pair of stones when the old pair cracked, and had walked beside the wagon the last 7 miles because the horse was failing. His wife Effie sat below him on a rush chair with her hands folded high on her belly. She was 5 months gone. She did not look at anyone. Thomasin took the chair Cadby indicated. Near the back, by the door, a man was standing whom she did not know. He had a plain dark coat that had been rained on and boots that had a good deal of the lane still on them. He was not from Nettlecombe. She took him for a clerk of Cadby's, or a man come about the lease, and she thought nothing further about him at all. Cadby pulled his spectacles down and read the will. It was short. There was a clock to the church. There was £4 to the woman who had nursed him at the end. There was a shilling to Gideon Halloway, named so, a shilling and no more. And then everything else. The mill house, the stones, the gearing, the standing lease upon the land, the whole of it to his daughter, Thomasin Varell, absolutely. The room made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound 30 people make when they have been waiting for a thing, and it has come. Effie Halloway put her hand over her mouth. Gideon did not move at all. He stopped turning the hat. His face did nothing whatever, which was worse than if it had done something. Cadby folded the paper. "That is the whole of it," he said. "I will want your signature, Miss Verrill, and then there are the lease papers, which are a separate matter." Thomason sat very still. She was aware of the room looking at her. She was aware of the rain on the window behind Gideon's shoulder. And she was aware, more clearly than any of it, of her father's voice 9 years before, on a night in October, saying a sentence in the mill yard that he had never afterwards taken back, and had never afterwards honored. "Mr. Cadby," she said, "may I ask you a question of law?" "You may. If a person is left a thing in a will and does not want it, can she refuse it?" Cadby's spectacles came back up onto his forehead. "She can," he said slowly. "It is called a disclaimer. It must be in writing, and it must be absolute, and it cannot afterwards be undone. And if she does it, where does the thing go? To the estate as though she had never been named. There being no other child, it would fall to the deceased's lawful stepson, subject to the court, which I would expect to be a formality. Then I will refuse it." Nobody spoke. Somebody at the back of the room laughed, one short breath of a laugh. The sort a man makes when he has misheard, Miss Verrill. Cadby had gone quite pale. "I would counsel you very strongly to take a week upon this. You are 8 days from your father's funeral. I would be failing in my duty if I did not say, in front of these witnesses, that you are proposing to give away everything you have in the world. I know what I am proposing. You will have nothing. I know that too." Gideon had come off the wall, Thomason. She did not look at him. She had made a calculation on the way up the stairs about how many people's faces she could look at, and still do this, and the number was none. "Give me the pen," she said. Cadby looked at her a long moment. Then he did a thing she remembered afterwards. With gratitude, he did not argue. He wrote out the form of it in his small, dry hand, and turned it round and set the pen across the top and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Read every word, my dear. I shall not be able to help you tomorrow." She read every word. Then she signed her name. Cadby witnessed it. The landlord witnessed it with his tongue between his teeth. Cadby sanded it and folded it and put it in the leather case and closed the clasp, and the small click of that clasp was the loudest thing in the room. Thomason stood up. "Miss Verrill," Cadby said, "you may remove your personal effects from the mill house, clothing, keepsakes. Nobody here will dispute it. I have them." She had brought them with her. She had known, she supposed since the night before. It was a sewing box of her mother's. Walnut, with a hinge that had been mended twice, and inside it 3 letters and a thimble and a lock of hair. She had left it in the passage at the foot of the stairs, and she went down now and took it under her arm. Gideon caught her at the door. He had followed her out, and his face had come apart entirely, and he was not able to speak yet. "Do not," she said. "Thomason, I never asked. I never once in 9 years asked him for. I know you did not." "Then why?" "Because you should not have had to," she said. "Look to Effie. She has gone white, and she should not be standing." She went down the stairs. The stranger in the plain coat was standing at the turn of the stair with his hat in his hand. He was a tall man, and he stood square where the stair narrowed, and she was carrying a sewing box under one arm, and had exactly nothing left in her that morning for politeness. "You are in my way," she said. He stepped back against the wall at once. As she passed him, he said, "Forgive me. May I ask you something?" "No." She went out into the rain. She did not go home, because she had no home, and she did not go to the village, because the village had just watched her do it. She went along the lane to the mill and past the mill and down the bank to the head of the race, where the water came off the yade and ran under the sluice, and she sat on the stone coping in the wet with her mother's sewing box on her knees. The rain eased and then stopped. The sky did not clear. The water went under the sluice with the same steady, heavy sound it had made all her life. 9 years ago, on a night in the October after the harvest, She had been 11 years old and awake when she should not have been. Her window looked down into the yard. There had been a lantern set on the wall, and her father and Gideon standing under it, and her father had been up since 4 that morning, and was past the end of himself, which was the only condition in which he ever said more than he meant to. They had been arguing about the launder. The old one was rotten through and there was no money for a new one, and Gideon had said he would cut it himself out of the elm that had come down in the spring, and her father had said, "No man cuts timber on my ground for nothing," and Gideon had said, "Then reckon it against my keep," and her father had said something else. And it had gone on that way for a while in the flat, exhausted manner of men who are too tired to shout. And then her father had put his hand on the young man's shoulder and had said the thing. She had heard it clearly. The yard threw sound up. He had said, "Cut it." Then, "Cut it and set it, and I will see you right. Sallow mill is a thing a man earns. You earn it, boy, and it is yours, and I will put my name to that when the harvest is in." Gideon had cut it. He had taken 12 days over it, and he had done it well, and the launder he set that autumn was still carrying water under her feet at that moment. And the harvest had come in and nothing had been put to paper, and a year had passed, and another, and the thing had never once been spoken of again by either of them. She had said nothing. That was the part she had carried. She had been 11 that year, and she had been 15 and 18 and 20, and at no point in 9 years had she gone to her father and said, "I heard you in the yard. I heard what you promised him." She had told herself at 11 that she had not understood it. She had told herself at 15 that it was not her business. She had told herself at 18 that Gideon would ask when he was ready and that it was not her place to ask for him. At 20, she had stopped telling herself anything and had simply not spoken, which is a thing a person can do for a very long time without ever once deciding to do it. Then her father had died, and Cadby had opened the case, and the whole of it had come to her. She sat by the race until the cold came up through the stone. She was not sorry. She turned it over and over, looking for the place where she was sorry, and there was no such place. There was only a kind of blankness where her life had been that morning, and underneath the blankness, so far down she could barely feel it, something that was almost relief. What she did not know, and would not learn for a long while yet, was that the man in the plain coat had not signed the witness register on the table by the door. Everyone else had. It was the custom at Nettlecombe, and the landlord kept the book. When Cadby went to close it that afternoon, there was one name wanting, and he asked the landlord who the tall gentleman had been, the one at the back who came in at the last and went out before the end, and the landlord said he had supposed him to be with Cadby. Cadby said that he had supposed him to be with the landlord. The two of them stood over the book for a moment. Then Cadby said it was of no consequence, and put his spectacles up, and thought about it again that night, and again a week after that. She took a bed at the Rowan and Fleece. It was not charity, and she would not have taken charity. The landlord's wife had a bad hip, and the scullery had got away from her, and Thomason offered 6 hours a day of it for the small room over the yard and what came off the plates. There is no dignified way to be handed a scrubbing brush in front of people who have just watched you give away a mill, and Thomason did not look for one. She rolled her sleeves and started on the pots. She was 3 weeks at it when the letter came from Cranmere Hall. It was not a letter. It was a printed form with her name written into a gap, requiring the attendance of Thomason Vrell upon the estate office on a matter touching the lease of Sallow Mill at 10 on Thursday, and it was signed by Ellis Tarn, land agent. She walked the 3 miles on the Thursday, in her one good dress, knowing exactly how good it was not. It was cold and bright and the hedges were bare. Cranmere Hall stood at the top of a rise with a beech avenue running up to it. She had seen it from the Marbury Road all her life the way you see a hill. She had never once been through the gate. A footman took her at a side door and put her in a room and left her. It was a library. There were more books in it than she had known existed, and a fire, and a long table with paper set out along it. She stood, because sitting felt like a liberty. There was a child on the floor by the fire. She was perhaps 7, with dark hair cut straight across, lying on her front with a slate propped against the fender, drawing. She did not look up when Thomason came in. She did not look up when the footman went out. Thomason waited. After a while, the child changed hands and went on drawing with the other one. "That is a clever trick," Thomason said. "I could not do it. My left hand is no use to me for anything but holding." The child stopped. She turned her head and looked at Thomason with a flat, unhurried attention that no adult in Nettlecombe had ever managed. Then she sat up and turned the slate round and held it out at arm's length. It was a horse, and a very good horse, for 7 years old, drawn once with the right hand and once with the left one over the other, so the lines doubled and made the animal look as though it were shivering. "That is better than I could do with 4 hands," Thomason said. The child's mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the beginning of the machinery of a smile. She turned the slate back and went on working. Thomason waited for her to say something. She did not say anything. The door opened at the other end of the room. A man came in. He came in fast, the way a man does when he has already been walking an hour with a bundle of papers under his arm and his mind visibly somewhere else. He was tall. He did not stop at the table. He went straight down the room to the fire and crouched on his heels beside the child and turned the slate towards himself and looked at the horse. He looked at it for a good while. "The near foreleg is wrong," he said. The child rubbed the leg out with the ball of her thumb. "It is wrong because you have only looked at horses walking. Go to the stable at 2 and look at one standing still for as long as you can bear it and draw it again." The child nodded once. He laid his hand on the top of her head for a moment. Then he stood up and came back along the room, and only then did he look at Thomason at all. She saw the boots first. They were clean now, but they were the same boots, and above them was the same length of man, and she knew before he opened his mouth, and she felt the knowledge go through her like cold water in the collar. "Miss Varell," he said, "I am obliged to you for coming." She did not answer. She was doing a sum in her head, and the sum kept coming out to the same answer, and she did not like it. "You were on the stair," she said. "I was at the Rowan and Fleece. In the long room." "Yes, and you are not a clerk?" "No." "Then who are you?" He set the papers down and squared them with 2 fingers, which she came to know later was a thing he did when he was buying himself a second. "I'm Cranmere," he said. The fire made a small noise. Thomason stood in her one good dress and thought about every word she had said to him on that stair, which was not many, and which included the words, "You are in my way." "I told you to move," she said. "You did. I told a duke to move. You told a man in a wet coat to move," he said. "And he was in your way, and he moved." She could think of nothing whatever to say to that. He drew a chair out and turned it to the fire and did not sit in it himself. "Sit down, Miss Farrell. This will not take long, and there is no reason to do it standing." She sat. The child had gone back to her horse and did not appear to be listening, though Thomason noticed she had stopped rubbing out. "This is my daughter," he said. "Junia, good morning," said Thomason. Junia raised one hand off the slate and put it down again. "She will not answer you," the Duke said. "It is not rudeness. She has not spoken since her mother died. That is 2 years and 9 months. I tell you this at once because people are apt to make a great business of it in front of her, and I would rather you had it plainly, and then let it alone." "Then I will let it alone." He looked at her when she said that. It was the first look he had given her that had anything in it besides business. "The lease," he said. He turned to the papers. Sallow Mill stood on Cranmere ground and had done for 140 years, and the lease her father held ran out at the quarter day, and a lease does not pass by a will. It passes at the will of the landlord. Her disclaimer had emptied the mill of an owner and left the tenancy hanging on nothing at all. Which means, he said, that on Lady Day the mill comes back to me, and I may put into it whatever man I choose, and no court in England has a word to say about it. Thomason's hands closed on each other in her lap. You gave that building away in front of 30 witnesses, he said, without securing the one thing that would have made the gift worth having. I want to be sure you understood that. I understood it. You understood it might come to nothing. I understood that it was not mine, and that keeping it would not make it mine, she said. What you do with your own ground is your affair. I could not have made it mine by holding on to a thing I had no right to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I signed a new lease on Tuesday. It is in the name of Gideon Halloway. It runs 21 years. Thomason heard the words. She heard them go in. Then, without any warning at all and without the least permission from herself, her eyes filled, and she put her hand up flat over the lower half of her face and held it there, and looked hard at the fire, and did not make a sound. The Duke turned away and went to the window and stood with his back to the room and looked out at the beach avenue for as long as it took. When he came back, she had her hands in her lap again. I am sorry, she said. I have not eaten since last night, and it has made me foolish. It has not made you anything, he said. There is a second matter. You are working in the scullery of a public house. I am. 6 hours a day for a bed, and what is left on the plates. You are well informed. I am the largest landlord in this valley, and everything that happens in it is told to me by somebody within the week, generally with the details wrong. He said it without pride and without apology. I have 3 offers to make you. You may take one or none. There is a cottage at the end of the Marbury Lane that is standing empty and wants a tenant. There is a place in this house as under housekeeper which would pay you £18 a year, or there is a sum of money which I would put with a bank in Marbury in your own name, and which would be enough that you need not decide anything at all for 2 years together. Thomason looked at her hands. She thought about the scullery. She thought about the smell of it, and the small room over the yard where the cold came up through the boards, and how she had lain in it 20 nights running, doing arithmetic that never came out. No, she said. Which no, all of them. He said nothing. He was watching her with a good deal of attention now. May I say why? She said. And then I will go, and you will not have to have me in your library again. Say why. Because if I take a cottage from you, or a place, or a sum of money, then what I did in that room stops being what I did. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. It becomes a bargain. It becomes a clever girl who gave up a mill and got a cottage and a bank account for it. And by Sunday, that is the version they will be telling in the Rowan and Fleece. And by Christmas, that is the only version there will be. And Gideon will hear it, and he will look at that mill for 21 years and wonder what it cost me and whether I was paid. And he will never once ask me, because he is not a man who asks. She stopped. She had not meant to say so much. I gave it back, she said. I did not sell it. There is a difference, and it is the only thing I have got left, and I would rather scrub pots for a year than let anybody muddle it. The clock on the chimney-piece went on. Junia had stopped drawing altogether, and was sitting up with her arms round her knees. That is a reason, the Duke said at last. It is my reason. Yes, he turned his signet round once on his finger. May I put something to you that is not any of the 3? You may put it. I do not promise to take it. If you will not have anything from me for yourself, will you name something you would have for somebody else? Thomason lifted her head. She looked at him for a long moment, and she thought about it properly, because she could see that he meant it, and that he would do whatever she said, and that made it a serious thing. 21 years is a long time, she said, but Effie Halloway will be brought to bed in the spring, and there is no glass in the west window of the mill house, and there has not been since the winter before last. My father would not spend on it. He said the shutter would serve. Glass, said the Duke, glass. And the west wall wants pointing, and I will not pretend I know what that costs, but I know it is less than 18 pounds a year." He looked at her. "You have just refused a house, a place, and a fortune," he said, "and asked me for a window." "I have asked you for their window," said Thomason. "That is not the same thing at all." She stood up. He stood at once. "Thank you for the lease," she said. "I will not pretend that was nothing. It was the whole of it." "Miss Farrell," she stopped at the door. "On the stair," he said, "I asked whether I might ask you something, and you said no." "I did." "I have not asked it yet." "No," she agreed. "You have not." And she went out, and the footman took her down, and she walked the 3 miles back to Nettlecombe in the cold, with her hands pushed into her sleeves, and she did not work out until she was past the second milestone that he had never once told her what the question was. The glass went into the west window of the mill house a fortnight later. Thomason heard about it in the tap room and did not go to look. Effie Halloway sent word by the potboy that she should come to her confinement when the time came, and Thomason sent back that she would, and meant it, and dreaded it. That was how the winter went on. The pots. The cold room. The 3 letters in the sewing box, which she had read so often she could have said them in the dark, and did sometimes, lying on her back listening to the wagons come in. She did not go near Cranmere Hall. She had no cause to, and she had a good deal of pride, and the 2 things propped each other up nicely. In the second week of February, a groom rode into the yard of the Rowan and Fleece and asked for her by name. He was a young man and plainly under instruction, because he did not dismount, and he did not come in. He handed down a slate wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and a folded paper, and he said, "I am to wait a quarter of an hour, and no longer, and I am to bring back whatever you give me, or nothing, and either is right." Thomason took the oilcloth off in the yard, with her hands still wet. It was a child's slate. On it, drawn carefully and rubbed out and drawn again, was a mill. It had a wheel and it had a race, and it had, in the small square of the west wall, 4 lines making a window. And underneath, in chalk, in capitals that had been gone over twice to make them stay, was one word, "Come." She unfolded the paper. It was 3 lines. She wrote that herself, and she carried the slate to me and put it in my hands. It is the first word she has put down for anyone in nearly 3 years. I send it because it is hers. It is not mine, and I have no part in it. You are under no obligation of any kind, and I shall not ask you a second time. There was no signature. There did not need to be one. Thomason stood in the yard with the slate in one hand and the paper in the other, and the cold coming up off the cobbles. "Wait," she said to the groom. "I am coming with you." Junia was in the library again, in the same place, on her front by the fender, and when Thomason came in, the child got up so fast she knocked the slate over. She did not run at her. She stopped a yard short and stood there, with her hands behind her back, looking up, waiting. "I came," said Thomason. Junia nodded. "You will have to teach me how this is done," said Thomason, "because I am slow, and I will get it wrong for a while, and you will have to bear with me." "Can you do that?" Junia thought about it. Then she went and fetched the slate and the chalk, and sat down on the hearthrug and patted the place beside her, and Thomason, in her one good dress, sat down on the floor of a Duke's library. They worked at it for an hour and a half. It turned out that Junia had a system, and that the system was better than anybody had given her credit for. She had a fast alphabet, with her fingers that she had made up herself. She had a way of drawing a thing in 4 strokes, when she was impatient. She had, above all, an expression she used when an adult had asked a stupid question, and by the end of the first hour Thomason had seen it 4 times. They did the horse, they did the mill, they did Orla Pike, the nurse, who was rendered in 2 strokes in a very large bun, and who came in at that moment and said, "Well, that is not kind," and went out with her ears red. And at some point Thomason looked up and the Duke was at the far end of the room. He was standing by the long table with a book in his hand that he was not reading. He had been there, she thought, for some while. When she saw him, he did not come forward and he did not speak. He put one finger against his lips and tipped his head at his daughter, who had her back to the room. And Thomason understood that she was not to say he was there. She went back to the slate. He stayed nearly 20 minutes. When Junia at last turned round, he was gone, and there was no sound at the door, and Thomason never did work out how he had managed it. The child wrote something then. She wrote it slowly, and she frowned over it, and she turned the slate round. Papa said you gave it all away. I did, said Thomason. Junia rubbed it out with her sleeve and wrote again. Why? Thomason looked at the small, serious face for a moment. Because a long time ago I heard something that I should have told somebody about, she said, and I did not tell them, not for 9 years. And when my father died, I found that I could either go on not telling and be comfortable, or say it out loud in front of everybody and be poor. And I had left it so late that saying it out loud was the only way anyone would believe me. Junia considered this with tremendous gravity. Then she wrote, "Were you frightened?" I was so frightened I could not look at anybody's face, said Thomason. I looked at the table the whole time. Junia nodded slowly, as one professional to another, and rubbed it out. Will you come back, if your father permits it? Yes. The child put the slate down and leaned over sideways until her head was against Thomason's arm, and stayed like that, not hugging, just leaning, the way a cat will settle against you without any ceremony about it. It was Wilna Skeet, the housekeeper, who saw her out, and who said, at the door, in the flat voice of a woman who has decided to say a thing once, 3 years in March, Miss Vero. 3 years, and that child has not put a mark on paper for a living soul. The Duke was at the gate. He was on foot with a dog at his heel, and he fell in beside her without asking, and walked her the length of the beach avenue. And he did not offer his arm, and he kept a yard of daylight between them the whole way. At the gate she stopped. Your Grace, she said, may I ask you something? You may. You were in the long room at the Rowan and Fleece. You sat at the back in a wet coat, and you did not sign the register, and nobody there knew who you were. She turned to face him. Why? The Duke looked down the avenue for a moment. I was not there for the reading, he said. He did not say anything else. He opened the gate for her and shut it behind her, and she went off down the Marbury Road with that sentence going round and round in her head like a stone in a boot. She went back on the Wednesday, and on the Wednesday after that. Nobody had arranged it. Junia had drawn a square with 7 marks in it and put a cross on one of them, and Thomason had said Wednesday then, and that was the whole of the negotiation. She came at 2 and stayed until 4 and walked home. The landlord let her go on condition she did the Tuesday pots twice over, which she did, standing at the sink until her hands were white and pleated at the fingertips. On the 4th Wednesday, the Duke was waiting in the hall when she came down. Miss Verrill, will you give me 10 minutes? He took her not to the library, but to a small room at the back of the house that had 1 window and a great many boxes in it and no fire lit. It was an office. There was a plain table and 2 chairs and a smell of dust and ink. I do not use this room, he said. Nobody comes into it. I want to tell you something, and I would rather do it where there is no fire and no tea and nothing whatever to be gracious with. Thomason stood by the table. Sit down if you like, he said. I am not going to. She sat. He went to one of the boxes and took out a single folded sheet and came back and put it on the table in front of her and stepped away from it as if it were something that might go off. Read that. She unfolded it. It was a draft in a clerk's hand, with corrections in a second hand over the top, dated the January before, and it was a notice to quit. It gave 6 months and set out in the flat language of such things that the mill was to be taken in hand by the estate at the expiry of the lease. Under the corrections, she could still read words struck out and written over. Somebody had wanted the second paragraph softer and had been overruled. She put it down. "That is my hand in the margin," the Duke said. The soft version was Tarn's. I made it plainer. I thought a man being put out of his living was entitled to know it in a sentence he could understand at the first reading, and I still think that, and it does not make it better. You were going to close the mill. I was going to close 4 of them. Sallow was the 3rd on the list. Tarn had the figures, and the figures were not arguable. A mill of that size cannot pay against Marbury, and it has not paid since I was a boy, and the ground under it is worth more in wheat. He put his hands behind his back. That is the business of it, and I could defend every line of it in front of anybody. That is not what I want to tell you. Thomason waited. I made a rule for myself when I came into this, he said. I have kept it 12 years. I do not put a family off a holding without going and looking at them first. Not the accounts, them. I go quietly, and I stand at the back and I look at the people I'm about to ruin, and then I go home and I sign it, or I do not. You came to Nettlecombe to look at us. I came to Nettlecombe to look at you. He said it without softening it at all. Your father had died, and there was to be a reading, and the whole household would be in one room together, which is a thing that does not happen twice. I had the notice drawn and in my pocket. I came in a wet coat so that nobody would ask me anything. I sat at the back and I did not sign the book, and I watched a family I had never met, in order to satisfy myself that putting them out would not be more than I could bear. The room was very quiet. Outside, somebody was raking gravel. I have called that rule a decency for 12 years, he said. It is not a decency. A decent man does not need to look at people to know what it cost. To turn them out of a house, he knows it from the paper. What I was doing in that room was standing at the back, weighing you up like stock at a fair, in your own grief, with the thing already written so that I could feel I had been fair while I did it. And none of you could have refused me, because you did not know there was anything to refuse. Thomason looked at the notice on the table. Why are you telling me this? Because you have been in my house 4 Wednesdays, and you have taken nothing from me, and it has become intolerable that you should think well of me on a false account. He turned to the window. I would rather you had it from me than from Tarn in 10 years over a card table. She sat for a while with her hands flat on the table. May I say something that is not to your credit either, she said. Say it. You are ashamed that you looked at us and did not know us. I will tell you what is worse. I knew us. Her voice was low and quite level. Gideon's mother was called Ada. She married my father when I was 8, and she died when I was 14, and she was the only person in that house who ever asked me what I thought about anything. She was ill for 4 months. At the end of it, she sent everybody out but me, and she took my wrist and she said, "He has nobody, Tommy, and your father is not a bad man, but he is a hard one. And you will be here, and I will not, and I want you to see that Gideon is dealt fair with." She stopped and started again, and I said yes. I was 14, and I meant it entirely, and she died on the Friday. And I did nothing at all about it for 6 years, and I already knew about the launder by then, and I said nothing, and I told myself every year that it was not my place. She looked up. You stood at the back of a room for one morning and did not know us. I stood in that house for 6 years and did know, and it was easier to keep quiet, and I kept quiet. So do not sit in a cold office and tell me you are the only one in this county who has been comfortable when he should not have been. He had turned round from the window. Is that why you would not take the cottage? He said. That is why I would not take anything, because it was not generosity. It was arrears, said Thomason. It was 9 years of arrears, and I paid it in one morning, and it very nearly killed me. And if anyone gives me so much as a chair for it, it stops being paid. Neither of them said anything for a while. I'm going to ask you for one thing, he said at last, and I want to be exact about it because I have been careless with you once already, and I do not intend to be again. I am not asking for anything that has a future in it. I am not asking you to be in this house in any capacity. There is no place attached to it, and there will be no money attached to it. And if you say no now, or in 6 months, nothing whatever happens, except that you stop coming and I go on as before." "Say it then." "Come on Wednesdays," he said, "and when you go, let me walk you as far as the gate, not further. The avenue is 1/3 of a mile, and it takes 11 minutes, and I should like to have those 11 minutes and no more." Thomason looked at him. "Why, the gate. Because 1/3 of a mile is a distance a man cannot ruin," he said. "There is no room in it to be anything but plain." She thought about the scullery, and about Will Mesquite saying 2 years, and about the small, warm weight of a child's head leaning against her arm without ceremony. "I will tell you next Wednesday," she said. The Wednesdays went on into March, and then into April. She never did give him a formal answer. She simply came, and when she left, he was at the door with the dog, and they walked the avenue, and after the 4th or 5th time neither of them mentioned that a thing had been agreed. They talked about small matters. That was the whole discipline of it. He told her about a tenant at Ambersley who had spent 9 years breeding a heifer that would not calve, and had finally, in a rage, given it to the church. She told him about the landlord's wife and her 3 theories concerning her own hip, all of them involving the weather in 1809. She told him her mother's 3 letters were in a language she could not read, and that she had never asked anyone to translate them because she was afraid of what they would turn out to say. He did not offer to have them translated. She noticed that and thought about it for a week, and decided it was the single most tactful thing anybody had ever done for her. Neither of them ever mentioned money. It was not an agreement. It was simply a room in the house that they both walked past. In the 3rd week of March, Effie Halloway was brought to bed at Sallow Mill, and it went badly for 14 hours, and then it went well. Thomason was there for the whole of it. Gideon stood in the yard the entire night, and would not come in and would not go away. And at 4 in the morning, Thomason opened the door and put a bundle into his arms, and he sat down flat on the wet cobbles with it because his legs had stopped working. They called the child Ada. Nobody asked Thomason's opinion about the name, which she understood and which she was glad of, and which she went out to the launder and cried about for 10 minutes on her own, before coming back in with a perfectly ordinary face. In April, Cadby sent for her. He had lost his copying clerk to Bristol and had 12 years of ledgers to fair copy, and he had, he said, remembered that Miss Varell wrote a very legible round hand on the day she ruined herself in his presence. If she cared to come into Marbury 3 days a week, he could pay her 7 shillings and 6pence, and she could lodge with his sister, who was deaf, and would not talk her to death. "Did anybody speak to you about me?" Thomason said. Cadby looked at her over his spectacles. "My dear girl," he said, "nobody has spoken to me about anything since 1804. Do you want 7 and 6? She wanted 7 and 6. She left the scullery in the last week of April, and for the first time in her life she had a door that shut and money that was hers, and nothing in the room but a bed, a table, a candle, and a walnut sewing box. And on Wednesday she walked the 4 miles out to Cranmere and sat on the floor and worked the slate. Junia was changing. It was slow and it was not tidy. She had begun to make a sound in her throat when she was pleased, a small, flat hum, and when she was very much pleased, she did it twice. In the 2nd week of May, she pulled Thomason's sleeve, pointed at the dog and hummed, and looked up with such open expectation that Thomason had to turn away and pretend to hunt for the chalk. Orla Pike wept in the passage. Will Mesquite said nothing at all, and put an extra blanket on Thomason's chair the following week, without comment. The Duke never once asked what progress there was. She thought at first that this was coldness. By the end of May she had understood it was the opposite, and that he did not ask, because if he was waiting for an answer, his daughter would feel it. There was one Wednesday at the end of May when the rain came down so hard on the avenue that they stopped under the beeches and stood there for the best part of 20 minutes. And the water came through the leaves in heavy separate drops, and neither of them spoke at all. And Thomasin stood with her arms folded and her shoulder about 18 inches from his, and understood, with complete clarity and no pleasure whatever, exactly what had happened to her. She walked to Marbury that night in wet shoes, and sat on her bed, and made herself say at once out loud, in the small room with the door shut, in the interests of not being a fool about it. "You are in love with the Duke of Cranmere," she said, "and nothing whatever can be done about it." Then she listed the reasons, because she had a clerk's mind now, and lists steadied her. He was a duke, and she copied ledgers for 7 and 6. He had a daughter who would be looked at all her life, and did not need to be looked at more. He had told her plainly there was no future in it, in a cold room with no fire, deliberately so that she could not mistake it. He had never once touched her hand, and she had spent her whole life saying she would not be anybody's arrangement, and was not going to start now by turning herself into one and being grateful about it. She blew the candle out. She went on the Wednesday after that, and the Wednesday after that. Lady Hesper Falkbridge came to Cranmere Hall in the 2nd week of June. Thomasin heard of it before she saw it. Cadby mentioned it, because Cadby's practice did a little of the Falkbridge business, and had done for 30 years, and he mentioned it in the flat way. He mentioned the weather, and then looked at her a moment longer than the remark required. Lady Hesper was the mother of the late Duchess. She was Junia's grandmother. She had a house in Bath and a house in London, and she came into the county twice a year, and she had, Cadby said, buried a husband, 2 sons and a daughter, and had not been observed to bend at any of it. The note came on the Monday. It was very short, and it was very civil, and it was not a request. It desired Miss Verrow to take tea at Cranmere Hall at 4 on Tuesday. Thomasin read it twice, and then wrote back that she was engaged with Mr. Cadby's ledgers until 5, and would come at 1:30, which was true, and which was also the only piece of ground she had, and she stood on it. She was shown into a room she had never been in. It was gold and pale blue, and it had a great deal of light in it. Lady Hesper sat with her back to the window, which Thomasin understood at once had been arranged. She was a small woman. That was the surprise. She was small and very upright, and she had a face like good furniture, and she looked at Thomasin from the shoes upward without any attempt at concealment. "Sit down, Miss Verrell. You have a hole in your glove." "I have. You might have mended it." "I might. I was copying until 5. Then you might have taken it off." Lady Hesper poured. "Sugar, thank you, no. You are the young woman who gave away a cornmill in a public house." "I am." "And, in front of 30 witnesses without securing any counter-promise, having taken no advice, 8 days after a funeral." "Yes, and you now attend at this house on Wednesdays." "And sit upon the floor." "I do." Lady Hesper set the pot down. "I am going to be direct with you, because you strike me as somebody who will smell condescension, and I have no time to disguise it. I have 3 things to say, and then I shall have said them." "Say them." "First, I do not think you are a fortune hunter. I have met a great many. They are frightened of me, and you are not, and they do not mend their own gloves badly. They mend them well." She said it without warmth. "That is the last kind thing I shall say to you, and you may hold on to it second. I think you are worse than a fortune hunter, because a fortune hunter can be bought off, and you cannot. You are a girl with a conscience that runs to extremes. Do not look at me like that. I have read the disclaimer. I have read the notes Cadby made at the time, which he was obliged to give me, and which he gave me very unwillingly. A woman who will beggar herself in a taproom to settle a 9-year-old debt of honor is not a woman who does things in proportion. And my son-in-law is a man who has never in his life done anything out of proportion. And he is at this moment, at 41 years of age, forming an attachment to the first person who has ever made him feel that his own carefulness was a small thing, That is not love, Miss Verrill. That is a man admiring his own opposite. Thomason's cup was steady in her hand. She had not touched it. "Third," said Lady Hesper. "Yes, my granddaughter has not spoken for 3 years and 3 months." The light moved on the wall. "You will have thought about the county," Lady Hesper said. "You will have thought. They will talk, and I shall bear it, and he will bear it, and in 10 years it will be an old story." "That is very likely true. Talk is survivable when you have a voice." She leaned forward slightly. "Junia has no voice. She will be looked at from the day she is presented until the day she dies. She will be second guest in every drawing room in England, and the only thing standing between that child and being made a spectacle of is the absolute and unarguable rank of her father, which is the one shield she has, and which she cannot lift herself. You may marry him. He may be happy. And you will have taken the edge off that shield at precisely the moment she needs it whole, and she will not be able to tell you so, ever, in words, and you will never know what it cost her." Thomason set the cup down in the saucer. Her hands had begun to shake, and she put them in her lap where they could not be seen, and she made herself take 3 slow breaths before she said anything at all, because the woman was right, and being right is a different weapon from being cruel, and there is no answering it the same way. "You have thought about this a great deal," she said. "I have thought about nothing else since March. May I ask you one question? You need not answer it. You may ask, who chose him for your daughter?" Lady Hesper did not move. Nothing happened in her face at all, but her hand, which was resting on the arm of the chair, closed slowly until the knuckles stood up white, and it stayed like that. "That is not your affair." "No," said Thomason. "It is not." She stood up. "And that is the whole of my answer to you, my lady, because you have just told me it is not my affair whether a mother settled her own child's life for her, and in the same hour you have sat there and settled a child's life who is not yours to settle either, and you have used the fact that she cannot argue back as the reason why you are right. Sit down, Miss Verrill." "I will not, thank you." Her voice had not risen. It had gone quieter, which was worse. "I will tell you what I am going to do, because you are entitled to hear it from me, and not from a servant. I am going to think about the third thing you said, and I am going to think about it properly, because it is the only argument anybody has put to me in my whole life that I cannot answer. And I want you to understand that I am doing that for Junia, and not because you told me to, and that if I could think of a way to do it without giving you the satisfaction, I would." She got as far as the door. "Miss Verrill," she stopped, but she did not turn round. "I said the second thing badly," said Lady Hesper, "about his admiring his own opposite. I said that to wound you, and it was beneath me, and it is also, I think, not true. Then why say it? Because the third thing is true," said the old woman, "and I could not be certain it would be enough." Thomason walked out of Cranmere Hall and down the beach avenue, and did not stop at the gate, and she was halfway to Marbury before she noticed she had left her gloves on the chair. She wrote the letter on the Friday, and it took her the whole evening and 7 attempts. The version she sent was 6 lines. She said that she would not be coming on Wednesdays any longer. She said the reason was hers, and was not anybody's fault, and was not a quarrel. She asked that Junia be told that Thomason had gone to Marbury to work, and that she thought of her, and that she be told it in those words, and not in kinder ones, because the child would know at once if it was dressed up. She said she was grateful. She did not sign it "Your obedient servant," because she was not, and she could not think of anything else, so she signed it only her name. There was no answer, and she had asked for none. June went on. She copied ledgers. Cadby's sister, who was deaf and formidable and made a very good rabbit pie, taught her a card game with no name that she had learned in Cork 60 years before, and they played it 4 evenings a week in complete silence. On the second Wednesday, a slate came, wrapped in oilcloth, brought by the same young groom. Thomasin did not unwrap it. She put it on the shelf above the bed. On the third Wednesday, another came. She put that one on the shelf too. On the fourth, she took them both down at midnight and sat on the floor with the candle and unwrapped them and looked at them for a long time and then wrapped them up again and put them back and did not answer because she had made a decision and she was not going to make it twice a week for the rest of her life. She was not sorry. That was the strange thing, and she turned it over the way she had turned over the other one by the race in November, looking for the place where she was sorry, and there was no such place, and there was no relief underneath it, either this time. There was just a flat gray level like a field after harvest. At the end of the month, she walked out to Nettlecombe on her free day to see the baby. The wheel was turning. That was what she noticed from the top of the lane, and she had to stop and stand still for a moment. Sallow Mill was working. There was flour dust on the sill and a cart in the yard, and the whole building was talking the way it used to talk, the floor and the stones and the low grinding note underneath. And in the west wall of the mill house there was glass, and the glass had a curtain behind it. And behind the curtain somebody had put a jug of hawthorn. Effie put the baby in her arms and made her eat, and then went up for her sleep because she was still tired. And Gideon walked Thomasin down to the head of the race. They stood at the launder. It was 20 years old now, and it was still true, and the water went along it without a drop out of place. "You have stopped going out there," Gideon said. "I have. Effie says you will not talk about it. Effie is right." Gideon put his hand flat on the elm and left it there. "When I was 22, he said, your father stood in this yard and told me this mill would be mine, and I believed him, and then he never said it again. And every year I thought I shall ask him, and every year I did not ask him because I could not stand to hear him say he had not meant it. So I said nothing for 9 years, and I let it happen to me." He looked at her. "And then you stood up in a public house and said it for me. So I know what it looks like, Tommy, when you have decided to be quiet about a thing. For somebody else's good." Thomasin did not answer. "That is what I thought," said Gideon. He took his hand off the launder. "You did it again," he said. "You heard something, and you have decided not to say it, and this time it is yours." He went back up to the mill because the cart was waiting, and Thomasin stood at the head of the race by herself with the water going under the sluice, and she found the place where she was, sorry, and it was very much larger than she had expected. He came on the 8th of July, in the afternoon, in the rain, to Cadby's office in Marbury. Thomasin was at the high desk with 9 pages done since dinner. She heard the outer door and heard Cadby's voice go up half a tone, which it did for nobody, and then the inner door opened. He had ridden. That was plain from the middle of him downward. His boots and breeches were filthy. His coat was black with wet across the shoulders. His hair was stuck flat to his head on one side, and he had not shaved. He stood in the doorway of a country solicitor's office, looking like a man who had been on a horse since dawn, without a good reason. Cadby came in behind him, said, "I shall be in the front," in a voice of very great neutrality, and shut the door. Thomasin put down her pen. "Your Grace, Miss Verrell." He did not come further in. "I want to say 4 things, and then I will go, and I have arranged them in order so that I do not lose my nerve in the middle. You are dripping on Mr. Cadby's floor. I am aware of it." She waited. "First, I am not asking you anything. I wrote to you in February that I would not ask a second time, and I hold to it, and nothing I say in this room is a question. Take that as fixed. Very well. Second, my wife's mother came to me on the 12th of June and told me what she had said to you, all of it, without being pressed and without leaving out what did not do her credit. She is a hard woman, and she is not a liar. She was right about 2 things, and wrong about 2, and I have spent 3 weeks establishing which was which, because you would have known at once, if I had come with it half done. What was she right about? That they will talk. For a decade, and some doors will shut, and 1 or 2 will be doors I mind, and that Junia will be looked at all her life whatever anybody does. He said it flatly, both true. I will not pretend either way. And wrong? That rank is the shield. He came one step into the room and no further. My wife had rank. She had it from her cradle, and she married more of it, and it did not do her the smallest good, and I watched it not do her good for 10 years, and called it a marriage because everybody I knew called theirs the same. Junia was 5 when her mother died, and the county's opinion of her is not what she lost. What she lost was the one person in the house who talked to her as though the answer mattered. He stopped. Rank did not protect her from that, and it never will. A shield is not a thing you inherit, Miss Varel. It is a person standing in the room. That is the third thing. That is the third thing. And the fourth. He was quiet for a moment. The fourth is what I have not told you, he said. You asked me at the gate why I was in that long room, and I told you I was not there for the reading, and you have been very patient about the rest of it for 8 months. You told me the rest of it, the notice, the rule. I told you why I went in, said the Duke. I did not tell you why I did not sign it. Thomason sat very still. I had the notice in my breast pocket, he said. I had a pen with me. It wanted nothing but my name and Tarn's, and Tarn was in the Rowan and Fleece tap room below stairs waiting to witness it, and my intention when I sat down at the back of that room was to go down at the end and sign it on the settle and be home before dark. And then a girl in a wet dress asked a small dry solicitor a question about the law, and I understood what she was going to do about 10 seconds before anybody else in the room did, and I sat there and watched her do it. He looked at the floor. I have made a great many decisions in my life, and every one of them has taken me a fortnight, he said. That one took the length of a signature. I mean the thing I decided at the back of a public house in November while you were reading the paper through before you signed it, when I did not know your Christian name and had never heard your voice. He looked up. I went out onto that stair to ask you, in November 8 months ago, with the notice still in my pocket. And you told me I was in your way, and you were quite right, and I have been finding out ever since how much I did not know about the woman I had already made my mind up about. The rain went on the window. Somewhere in the front office Cadby had begun very deliberately to move papers about. That notice went back into its box unsigned that night, he said, and I had the 21-year lease drawn on the Monday against Tarn's advice, and at a loss the estate will feel for a good many years, and I did it before I had the smallest reason to suppose I should ever be in a room with you again. It was not for you. It was because I had sat in the back of that room and been shown, by somebody who did not know I was there, what a person does when a thing is not theirs. End quote. Thomason found that she had stood up at some point and did not remember doing it. You said you would not ask. She said, I have not asked. I have told you a fact about myself in November. That is all this is. And now I go back to my horse, said the Duke, and you go back to your ledgers, and nothing whatever is required of you, and I shall not come again. He turned to the door. And it was at that moment that Thomason saw, through the glass panel into the front office, the top of a small dark head. Junia was standing by Cadby's stove in a traveling cloak much too heavy for July, with Orla Pike behind her, and a slate held against her chest in both arms. You brought her, said Thomason. She was on the horse in front of me from Cranmere, said the Duke, and she would not be left. She does not know what I have said in this room. I have not used her, and I would not. Thomason went past him and opened the door. Junia did not run. She came across the front office at a walk, very fast and very straight, and stopped a yard short in the old way, with the slate held up, and Thomason went down on her knees on Cadby's floorboards. The slate said, in chalk, gone over 3 times, W.A. Did you stop? Because somebody told me that I would do you harm, said Thomason, and I believed her, and I have been believing her for a month, and I have never in my life been so wrong about anything. Junia's face did something complicated. She turned the slate over. On the back was a mill and a wheel and a race, and a window with 4 lines in it. And Thomasin was still looking at that when she heard it. It was not loud. It was a small, cracked, rusty sound, like a door that has not been opened for 3 winters. And it came out crooked, and it came out anyway. Come home. Nobody moved. Orla Pike had both hands over her mouth. Cadby had taken his spectacles off and was cleaning them with great attention and not looking at anybody. The Duke had one hand braced against the doorframe. Thomasin looked at the child. "Say it again," she said, "only if you want to." "You need not." Junia thought about it with her whole face. "Come home," she said. Then she pushed the slate into Thomasin's hands and stood there, breathing hard and looking extremely pleased with herself. And Thomasin put her forehead against the child's shoulder and did not say anything at all for some considerable time. When she stood up, her face was wet, and she did not do anything about it. The Duke had not moved from the doorframe. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes, you have kept your word." "I have." "You said in February that you would not ask a second time, and you have not. You said in that cold office that there was no future attached to Wednesdays, and you never went back on it. You have stood in this room, dripping on Mr. Cadby's floor, and you have not asked me for one single thing." Her voice was not steady now, and she let it not be. "So I must do it, because you will not, and because I have spent my whole life being quiet about things, till it was nearly too late. I did it to Ada. I did it to Gideon for 9 years. I am not doing it to you." She took a breath. "If you were to ask me," she said, "the answer would not be the one you have been preparing yourself for." The rain went on. "May I ask you now?" said the Duke. "Yes. Thomasin Varel." He came away from the doorframe. "Will you marry me? Not because my daughter has just spoken and I am beside myself. Not because you are poor and I am not. And I will tell you plainly that if you would rather go on copying ledgers after we are married, then you shall, and I will not say a word about it. Because I sat at the back of a room 8 months ago and watched you give away everything you had to a man who had not asked you for it, and I have wanted every day since to be in a house where that is the ordinary standard, and I do not think I can go back to living in one where it is not." "Yes," said Thomasin. He crossed the floor and he did not take her in his arms. He stopped in front of her and he took both her hands and turned them over, and he looked at them for a while. They were not good hands. The knuckles of the right one were split across from the scullery, healed badly in the winter, and split again. The first 2 fingers were stained black to the second joint with copying ink that did not come off for anybody. There was a rough patch inside the left thumb from 4 months of a scrubbing brush that would not go for another year. He looked at all of it. Then he lifted her right hand and put his mouth against the back of it, briefly, and set it down. "Come home," he said. "You are both wet through, and Cadby wants his office." Junia, from somewhere near the stove, said, "Come home," for the 3rd time that afternoon, apparently on general principle, and Orla Pike had to go outside. They were married at Nettlecombe Church on the 2nd Tuesday in September. The church held 90, and there were 140 in it, and the rest stood in the yard in the rain and did not go home. Effie Halloway cried from the first line to the last. Gideon gave her away, and his hand shook the entire length of the aisle, and he never once looked at the congregation. Cadby sat in the 3rd row with his spectacles up on his forehead looking. An observer might have said, insufferably pleased with himself. Junia carried the ring and did not speak during the service, and Thomasin had told her beforehand that she need not and that nobody would mind, and afterwards in the porch she said that was very long, and 4 people who heard it had to go and stand somewhere else. Lady Hesper Falkbridge came. She sat in the 2nd row in grey and gave nothing away whatever, and at the breakfast at Cranmere she came across the room to Thomasin with a glass in her hand. "Duchess, my lady, I said a great deal to you in the blue room. You did." "I withdraw none of it," said Lady Hesper. I was wrong about the shield. I have thought about it since, and I have concluded I was wrong, and I am too old to enjoy saying so. The rest of it I stand by, and I expect to be proved right about the county within the 12-month. I expect you will be. Yes, the old woman drank. You left your gloves on my chair. I have had them mended properly. And she walked away, and did not refer to any of it again as long as she lived. She was proved right about the county inside 4 months. In January, a woman at a Bath assembly, who had a title and no manners, asked Thomason across a card table and in a carrying voice how she had found the transition from trade. Lady Hesper Falkbridge, who had not been observed to raise her voice in 40 years, said she had not been aware that copying a solicitor's ledgers for 7 and 6 constituted trade, that her granddaughter's mother had done it out of necessity and not vulgarity, and that she would be glad to explain the difference to anybody at the table who required it. 14 people heard her. By March, it was all over 3 counties, and nobody asked Thomason that question again. The other thing she learned in November, and she learned it by accident from Orla Pike. They were doing out the nursery cupboards. Orla had been at Cranmere 16 years and had a way of talking while her hands were busy and not while they were not. And she said, apropos of finding a stack of children's books with the spines gone, "He will want those kept, your grace. Those are the door books." "The what?" Orla stopped, and it was clear from her face that she had said something she had not meant to say. "Orla, he will not thank me. I dare say he will not." Orla Pike put the books down on the chest and folded her hands. When her mother died, she said, she stopped speaking, and she would not have anybody in the room at night. Not me. Not her father. She screamed. If the door was opened, and the doctor said leave her be, she will come to it. And he could not leave her be. So he took a chair, and he set it in the passage outside her door, and he read aloud through the door until she was asleep. For how long? An hour. Sometimes 2. No, for how long, Orla? Orla Pike looked at her. 2 years and 4 months, she said. Every night he was in the house. He was in London 22 nights in that time, and he did not go for longer than that ever. And I know because I kept the count myself and I never told a soul, and he does not know I kept it. He would come up at 8, and he would sit in that passage in the cold with a candle on the floor, and he read that child through the whole of Robinson Crusoe 4 times, because it was the one she had banged on the door for. And he stopped in July. She picked the books up again. He stopped in July because she came out and sat on the floor with him, and after that they read on the landing. And he has never mentioned it to anybody in this house, and if you tell him I told you, he will not say a word to me about it, and that is worse. Thomason stood in the nursery with a pile of ruined books in her arms. She did not mention it that night, or that week. She mentioned it in the first week of December, in the evening, in the small room with the one window and the boxes, which he still used for nothing, and where they had got into the habit of sitting because it was the only room in the house without a portrait in it. "The door books," she said. He turned a page. Orla talks when her hands are busy. It is a recognized condition. Thomason put her sewing down. 2 years and 4 months. It was not 2 years and 4 months. It was, however many nights it was, 22 of which you were not there, and Orla counted. "Orla," said the Duke, "is a menace." He went on reading, or went on holding the book. Thomason watched the side of his face. "Ansel." He looked up. "You read Robinson Crusoe to a shut door 4 times, she said. It was the one she wanted. "Yes," said Thomason. "That is what I am saying to you." He did not answer that. He looked at her for a while with the gray eyes that had gone over her hands in Cadby's office, and then he put the book face down on his knee, which he never did to a book, and reached over and took her wrist and held it. And they sat like that, and neither of them said anything else. And upstairs, a child who had not spoken for 3 years and 4 months was arguing with Orla Pike about the necessity of washing the mill wheel at Sallow, turned all that winter and the winters after it. Unia grew tall and rode badly, and then well, and became in the fullness of time extremely difficult, which her father maintained was a sign of excellent health. Ada Halloway learned to walk in the mill yard and had to be fished out of the race twice before she was 3, on both occasions by her father, who then had to sit down. Thomasin went on copying for Cadby until the old man retired. She walked down to the head of the race sometimes, when she was at Nettlecombe on her own, without saying where she was going. She would put her hand flat on the elm of the launder. It was smooth and gray now and hard as iron, and it had been cut by a young man of 22 out of a tree that came down in a spring gale, on the strength of a promise made under a lantern by a tired man who did not keep it. Everything she had came out of that piece of wood. She had lost a mill because of it, and a name in the village, and a winter of her hands. She had got back a brother who spoke to her, and a child who spoke at all, and a man who had sat in a cold passage for 2 years reading to a door. She had said no to a house and a place and a fortune, and yes to a question that had taken 8 months to be asked, and she had come to understand that these were not 2 different things. They were the same answer given twice. No to being paid for, yes to being known. There was nothing else in it. A life is built out of small, hard truths, laid one on top of another, and the only skill is saying them out loud at the time instead of 9 years afterwards. She would walk back up the lane with the light going, and at the top of the beach avenue there would be a door standing open, and a man in it, not because he had been sent for, and not because it was his duty, and not because anybody had told him she was coming, because he had heard the gate.